April 1945. In the shadow of a ruined German hospital, fatigue and surrender cling thick to the dawn. Steel-grey light spills through broken windows onto muddy floors where an exhausted group of German nurses gathers, hands raw, cheeks hollowed by hunger and sleeplessness. With each labored breath, the cost of a light bombardment and rationing sinks deeper into muscle and bone. The Red Cross armband, once a badge of order, now hangs loose, its promise battered, uncertain. In the corridor, the steady crunch of boots interrupts the silence. American soldiers, flanked by women in heavy coats carrying baskets, step carefully over rubble. Their arrival brings not the sharp fear of enemy occupation, but the slow, confusing thrum of hope. Among the American women, rations are unpacked biscuits, tins of meat, real white bread, chocolate. They move gently, offering a first kindness not in words, but in food. The German nurses, numb and unsure, watch as their hands are guided toward a piece of bread, a tin of milk. The first bite seems impossible. Pride and shame tangled with relief, eyes well with tears silent, involuntary, born of weeks without plenty and years without trust. The exchange is almost wordless. The crackle of wrappers, the quiet thank you nodded in place of speech, the muted weeping that marks the wall crumbling between hunger and abundance, defeat and compassion. Across Germany, April had arrived like a rumor of collapse. The Western Allies, moving swiftly from the Rhine, pressed deep into Bavaria and Saxony. Smoking cities, shattered bridges, endless convoys, these were now the signs of a nation's unraveling. Between columns of armor and infantry, the local infrastructure crumbled. Hospitals swelled with the wounded, but supply lines so rigid, so precise before were now broken by bombing, panic, and 1,000 desperate migrations. In these final weeks, both victors and vanquished felt history closing in, each sunrise a blend of dread and exhausted relief. By the time American soldiers entered the town, the German nurses had survived months of deprivation, forced to ration black bread, sugar, and turnip soup. They kept small ledgers of inventory as if order alone could stave off starvation. Many wore the same uniform for weeks, washing collars and cuffs by night in icy water. Their patients a mix of wounded soldiers, civilians, and displaced persons filled beds stacked 2 or more to a room. The distinction between front line and home front dissolved inside cold stone walls. Nurses became porters, cooks, even grave diggers, with discipline and decency breaking down only when pain or hunger overwhelmed. Allied intelligence had marked the hospital as a neutral zone, one of the few remaining places where combatants and non-combatants might meet without open weapons. American military planners understood the symbolic power of mercy as the Red Cross coordinated convoys in tandem with advancing units. For the first time since there was outbreak, men and women who had spent years regarding one another through rifle sights prepared to meet in the vulnerable, liminal space of care. Orders from SHEF and the Red Cross prioritized essential supplies, condensed milk, flour, medicines, and above all, bread, the plain white loaf that had become as rare as peace. Outside, rumors ran ahead of tanks. Some whispered that Americans would bring only occupation and retribution. Others hoped for kindness and supplies. The German nurses prepared as best they could, hiding anything that might invite suspicion, praying that the Allies would honor the Red Cross stitch to their sleeves, still believing in the old Geneva codes despite evidence of those codes' frequent collapse elsewhere. Inside the hospital, space was divided by makeshift curtains, candles set in bottles for light, night watch nurses barely able to keep their eyes open over medical charts. Near the entrance, a fading chalkboard recorded patient names, conditions, and a tally of rations, each line a quiet monument to endurance. Each night was marked by the low groan of pain, the soft kindness of women who, in the end, could offer little more than presence and witness. Surrender felt inevitable. Hopeless so, the stage was set for a moment when basic charity might restore. Something beyond hunger when food, shared across lines of defeat, could become the beginning of real reconstruction. The Allied convoy reached the outskirts as rain began to fall, casting the hospital's battered fard in a pall of grey. American vehicles, marked with the Red Cross and punctuated by the quiet presence of women volunteers, rolled slowly past hollow-eyed villagers gathering in doorways. For weeks, news of surrender and liberation had travelled like a pulse through every street. But here, where suffering piled up in rows of cots, relief was measured by what could be unloaded from the trucks. The first contact was cautious. American officers addressed the head nurse in clipped German, then signaled their women's relief teams, primarily Red Cross, and army nurse caused volunteers to move inside. The corridor smelled of antiseptic stem plaster and the sweet, sour hint of decay. These Americans, some straight from field hospitals at Normandy and the Ardennes, knew well how war would down the body. They brought not just food and medicine, but a practiced sensitivity shaped by months of tending a light wounded. For the German nurses, the sight of American women in uniform, clean boots, faces war-weary but not defeated, was as strange as any moment since surrender. Instinctively, they braced for inspection, searched for signs of judgment or aggression. Instead, the Americans came bearing crates of condensed milk, flour, vitamins, and in deliberate abundance, loaves of white bread, biscuits, chocolate bars. It was not the taste alone, but the symbolism. White bread, something nearly mythic after years of ration brine and potato cakes, became a signal of both occupation and mercy. Rations were tallied, distributed, and the process documented by both sides. Red Cross officers made lists. German staff helped carry boxes, some still hesitant, others already whispering thanks. The act of giving an American nurse slipping a chocolate into a trembling hand was both routine and radical, collapsing distinctions between victor and vanquished at least for a moment. The nurses who wept did so for themselves and for patients in every ward who, for the first time in months, awoke to the aroma of real bread and sweet biscuits, federally and locally. Allied leaders knew such acts mattered. Field notes from SHAEF and Red Cross archives record that many units made direct and generous provision for German civilian medical personnel, believing charity might soften the aftermath of abrupt defeat and ease occupation's burdens. This was not sentiment alone. The policy was rooted in hard lessons learned as units advanced through towns where resistance often dissolved not from fear, but from food shared and kindness shown. By late evening, as the relief teams gave final instructions, the hospital's rhythm changed. Meals were planned anew, medicine dispensed in higher doses, and the record of rations became not only a tally of survival, but the first hint of recovery. Mothers, patients, and nurses alike understood that in the new order, peace the chance for dignity would often arrive quietly, passed hand to hand in simple acts of care. The stage now set. The drama of receiving and giving would soon unfold from every possible human angle. The moment American women offered their rations was witnessed from every angle, a convergence of emotion, history, and necessity. From the human perspective, German nurses found their reserve stripped away. Weeks of silent pride, battered spirit, and enduring discipline broke under the shock of abundance. Some sobbed openly, unable to mask the relief and shame entangled in the taste of real bread, whispers of gratitude passing among hands once trained only for triage. Others retreated quietly, sharing biscuits with patients and exchanging glances that spoke of both humiliation and hope. For many, receiving bread was both a confession and a benediction, the surrender of old identity and the fragile birth of new possibility. The Americans observed with mixed feeling, empathy, pride, and a fatigue born of months at war themselves. Their training taught them to see beyond uniforms, to find the patient behind the nationality. Voices were gentle, gestures practiced one. Nurse broke a chocolate bar for a girl with fever. Another ensured a wounded orderly received an extra slice of bread. Their own memories of hunger at Anzio, blood on Normandy sand, sleepless nights in tents gave them perspective and a sense of kinship, even as history's weight pressed between every word, tactically. The process was remarkable for its efficiency. Red Cross logistics required precise inventories, distribution by ward or severity, emergency dosing when supplies were thin. The Americans knew that hunger bred unrest, that compassion inspired trust. By sharing rations on arrival, leaders hoped not only to remedy deprivation, but to anchor the transition from wartime suspicion to post-war reconstruction. Morally, the symbolism was profound. Giving bread meant more than the easing of hunger. It was ritual, reconciliation, and refusal to let war script every act. Commanders cited these moments in dispatches, noting how sharing rations cooled tempers, rebuilt frayed norms, helped dare the first steps toward coexistence. For the German side, the collapse of identity came sharp and sudden. Nurses, who once represented order and discipline, now knelt beside battered beds, offering American bread to children and soldiers, learning the taste and the meaning of both defeat and kindness. Leadership and command choices shaped each detail of the event, from the decision to deploy experienced American nurses to the clear instruction that food must be shared without distinction. Diaries from the Red Cross show leaders briefing teams on the principle that mercy, not mere protocol, would build trust. Some German hospital administrators, initially wary, saw in the American gestures a model for post-war reconstruction. Discipline sustained by empathy, structure restored by charity. Even the Allied officers, many haunted by bitterness from previous battles, found the distribution of rations to be a moment where steel exhaustion and human hope were briefly reconciled. For the Americans, sharing bread was also a stand against vengeance, a reminder of Geneva ideals, and a practical lesson drawn from the devastation of France, Belgium, and Holland. They understood that reconciliation was built from small, repetitive gestures, that post-war alliances would be crafted as much by nurses in ruined wards as by diplomats in grand halls. The enemy perspective, German, American, and even local civilian, was marked by confusion, humility, and quiet relief. Some nurses expected interrogation, others braced for confiscation or blame. The actual giving of rations created surprise and a new, tentative sense of safety. Patients witnessed the exchange as both spectacle and promised rumors swirled among wards that food had come not as plunder, but as a first draft of peace. Overnight, the hospital's record books showed an upswing. Better nourishment led to improved patient statistics, reduced fevers, and a burst of morale. Interviews years later, from both sides, recall this event as a turning point, a moment when bread, simple and abundant, eclipsed weapons as the symbol of America's arrival in the heart of Europe. The decisive moment unfolded in orderly chaos, a corridor lined with German nurses, their hands trembling as rations were passed. The American women, pale with exhaustion, yet purposeful, opened crates and laid out their bounty: biscuits, loaves, tins of condensed milk, hot chocolate. Light flickered on tiled floors as the smell of fresh bread chased out the lingering odor of antiseptic. For a heartbeat, the brutal physics of war seemed suspended. A nurse named Lise, her name noted in later interviews, was the first to taste, her face drawn tight by months on turnip broth, relaxed in disbelief as she chewed. Tears broke, traced by dust and fatigue. One by one, the others followed. The moment scripted itself, a tableau of relief, grief, and gratitude. Some nurses fed patients before themselves, others turned away, overcome by the conflict of pride and necessity. The American women not immune to their own trauma. Memories of Anzio and Normandy clinging to their posture offered not charity alone, but a recognition of mutual weariness. The exchange was silent and deliberate. There was no speech, no ceremony, no photograph, just hands reaching, food breaking, and the thick, unsteady hush of relief. The head nurse, once rigid, broke into sobs. Americans, moved by the display, pressed chocolate and white bread into the hands of their former enemies. The unity of gesture replaced years of brutality, at least for a few moments. Nearby, the sound of weeping became the rhythm of healing. Amidst the exchange, a new trust was forged, fragile but real, and every act became a small act of resistance against hunger, against vengeance, against forgetting the very core of what had been lost and found in war. As dawn faded, the ripple effects deepened. In the hours that followed, the hospital's rhythm shifted, kitchens revived. Patients murmured in disbelief over newfound rations. German nurses lingered in the halls, rediscovering the energy to teach, clean, and comfort. The Americans, too, stayed long enough to witness the slow blooming of hope. Each ward echoed with quiet blessings, thank yous exchanged, biscuits halved, bread saved for later or shared among the weakest. The impact was immediate and measurable. Medical reports recorded a drop in fevers, a spike in nutritional recovery, and a marked improvement in morale. In several wards, laughter returned, hesitant at first, then persistent as old boundaries slipped away. The bread became more than sustenance. It became a touchstone for memory. Nurses asked for recipes, children learned to trust, and fears of further violence ebbed. The Americans left behind a legacy folded in simple packages, rations delivered, wounds dressed with care. A message that defeat need not mean humiliation, nor victory entail vengeance. The aftermath would be written in diaries and Red Cross reports. Patient lists grew longer, but the deaths, for once, grew fewer. Stories spread throughout town and countryside here. In the ruins, mercy and bread outlasted anger. The decisive moment, first silent and then sung, became a lesson in human possibility. With the first ration shared, healing took root in ways both practical and profound. In the following days, the hospital's patient list stabilized. The record books, meticulously maintained even through bombardment, now reflected fewer deaths, quicker recoveries, and far fewer infectious outbreaks. Bread and biscuits became critical supplements to the meager state rations, sparking the first real improvement many had seen in months. Diary entries from nurses, German and American alike, spoke of a new spirit in the wards. German staff described a lifted veil, a sudden easing of the persistent fear that had haunted every hallway. For the Americans, measured optimism appeared in daily reports. Morale improved markedly after relief drops, noted one Red Cross leader. Word spread quickly through town that the hospital, once on the brink, had found an unexpected lifeline from its occupiers. Relief supplies now arrived with greater regularity. Kitchens reopened, children were sent food beyond strict rations. Some nurses circulated recipes for American bread, hoping to recreate the texture and taste that had so moved them. The emotional impact lingered each time a loaf was broken. It recalled the moment of mercy, the day when American and German women became, briefly, sisters in survival. Letters sent to family to Dresden, Munich, small villages along the Rhine carried news of this miracle. Many survivors in later years cited these acts not merely as proof of Allied benevolence, but as the first real indication that peace might actually mean dignity, not simply the end of violence. The hospital endured, rebuilt brick by brick, nurse by nurse, with bread remaining both staple and symbol. Months passed, and the event became legend in the town. Interviews and oral histories gathered years later show villagers recalling the arrival of American bread not as charity, but as a signal that the war's worst wounds could begin to heal. The hospital became a nucleus for reconciliation, a place where American nurses returned regularly to share news, offer advice, and help establish new medical routines. Children who survived that spring often remembered the taste of chocolate, the shape of the biscuit, the laughter heard for the first time in ages. For many German nurses, the act of being fed by former enemies invited severe emotional reckonings. Guilt at defeat, relief at mercy, a quiet sense of belonging in the new order. The official aftermath was documented in both Red Cross and U.S.N. Army reports. They note a dramatic improvement in community trust, a reduction in civil unrest around Allied medical centers, and sustained partnerships between German civilian workers and occupying American medical teams. Allied humanitarian policy was recalibrated after these events, emphasizing local aid, cultural respect, and the importance of routine human contact as a means of peacekeeping. Years after the war, the town celebrated anniversaries of liberation, not only with parades or flags, but with communal meals, bread broken among neighbors who now saw peace in nourishment and forgiveness, not just silence after gunfire. In the quiet after the storm, bread remains the symbol of what war seldom provides, reconciliation born not of force, but of care. The simple act of American women sharing their rations became more than nourishment. It was a ceremony, an invitation to dignity, and a threshold to recovery. Within the walls of a battered hospital, the boundaries of nation, wound, and duty blurred, replaced by a new logic of human possibility. Years, even decades later, survivors recall not only the taste of bread, but the feeling of hope when the enemy offered sustenance, when pride yielded to gratitude, and when a future built on compassion began. In the sweep of history, these moments of shared bread, silent tears, and mutual repair form the true foundation of peace.